everyone, and welcome to the fourth in our series of special webinars this year on sustainability in lighting. Today's event is organised by Recolight, the UK's leading compliance body for waste, electrical and electronic equipment regulations. My name is Ray Molony. I'm the editor of the Circular Lighting Report, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half. Now, today we're focusing on projects. Now, in a perfect world, all lighting projects will be as sustainable as possible, but in reality, there are loads of barriers and challenges and compromises that we have to deal with. Now, today we're going to look at some real-world case studies where the lighting was upgraded, refurbished, or remanufactured, and we'll explore the obstacles and how they were overcome. And as you can see, we have a stellar lineup of speakers. Our panel today are Joel Smedberg. He's the CEO of the Swedish firm Brighteco. We have Sophie Parry, who's the new head of Trilux UK's Akademie. We have John Bowden, who's the director at Silent Design. Jonathan Rush, who's director of lighting design at Horley. Benz Roos, who's senior lighting designer at Spears Major. And of course, we will have Nigel Harvey, CEO of Recolight, will also be joining us. Now, look at today's agenda. First up is Joel, and he's going to walk us through some of the projects supported by his company's unique business model, which is really interesting. Sophie will talk us through the refurbishment of custom luminaires at a major office project. She looked at the scheme from the initial assessment right to prototyping, testing and delivery. Jonathan will explore a case study that illustrates how we can and we must change our approaches to lighting use. And finally, Ben's, excuse me, he will share the learnings from a recent project at the Barbican in London. This was an exhibition entitled Our Time on Earth, which is said to be Spears Major's most sustainable project to date. So looking forward to diving into that. And as I say, Nigel will be joining us as well. So the session will be followed by a Q&A in which we obviously welcome your thoughts, your comments and your questions. Now, before we get into that, a little housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded. It will in due course appear on the Recolight website as well, so you can listen again at your leisure. The webinar will be an hour and a half and we'll finish at 12:30 today. So now please put your questions in the questions box and put your chat in the chat box. And I say this every time because I'll only be looking at the questions during the event, but my colleague Suzanne or even Nigel will be taking care of the chat. So if you have any technical questions or any issues, put them in there and Suzanne will do her best to assist you. Now, as I said, today is just one of a series of webinars on this topic. Now, if you've missed any of the previous ones, you can listen to a replay. Sorry.
Sorry, Sophie, you've put your video on. Thank you. Good.
Very keen to get started, which is good. Now, if you you're just looking at the webinars for this year, Suzanne, if you missed any of the previous ones, you can go to the Recolight website and look at a replay. And so we've done 3 already this year, how to be a sustainable lighting manufacturer, innovations in sustainability. And today we're doing sustainable lighting projects. Now, on the 17th, we are going to drill into a topic that's not really that discussed in the industry, which is CAD fit outs. And we're going to look at how we can make them more sustainable. Now, as you know, you will be aware, CAD fit outs are often sort of ripped out with the lights, the ceiling, carpets, and everything else, often end up as waste. And this discussion will look at ways in which we can end this practice. So that's on the 17th, same time, 11 o'clock. And as I say, you can register for that webinar free at recolight.co.uk. Now, we've also got there's some really good stuff in the last couple of years webinars. You know, it's not all dated. To some great speakers and some very valid information that's still valid today. So you can go in there and you can fast forward to the individual speakers, etc., etc. So I do recommend those. You can also, excuse me, keep up with all the things that are happening in the industry on the Circular Lighting Report. Now, this is again on the Recolight website. Click on news. It features news, features, video interviews with leading players. As I say, on the Recolight website, click news. Now, we're also running a series of one-day workshops on lighting product design for the circular economy. They're continuing across the country. They're in person, and they're run by Simon Fisher, the well-known luminaire and product designer, and he's the founder and director of FMark. Now, what he does is he goes through the circular economy standards, the specifications such as TM66 and TM65, and he shows, you know, how you can improve the circularity and sustainability and the embedded carbon of your products. Now, you can attend scheduled workshops with industry colleagues, or you can arrange bespoke, dedicated ones tailored to your organization. Now, I'm told there's still places left for the one on the 15th of November in London. So there's still places for that one, 15th, and that's where, you know, industry colleagues and Simon will go through all of the environmental and sustainability metrics. Details again on our website. Now, Circular Lighting Live 2022 took place last month to a sellout audience, and I'd like to thank the 250 or so delegates who participated and supported our first ever outing. It's a one-day conference and exhibition. It's here in London, and it's totally dedicated to circularity in lighting. Features lots of presentations, panel discussions, debate on the route to a more sustainable future. And I suppose the key takeaway was the sort of the traction that metrics like TM66 and TM65 and are getting in the industry, and a lot of interest in that among specifiers, and I think that's going to filter out to the whole industry in the coming months and years. Now, it's clear that we need to move to a bigger venue, and next year's event is going to take place at the Royal College of Physicians in London. That's the sort of building beside Regent's Park, and this is a wonderful space. They got great tiered theatre area, and they got loads of space for exhibitions and all that type of thing. And that takes place on the 21st of September, which is a Thursday in 2023. So that's a date for your diary for next year. The website is now live, and soon you'll be able to register to ensure your place. If you'd like to exhibit, and why wouldn't you, get in touch with either Adrian or myself. Our contact details are also on the website. Now, in other news this month, the Danish company Focus Lighting, which is one of the big outdoor manufacturers and players in the Scandinavian market, they have become the latest company to announce a take-back service. So they're saying that from now on, they will assume responsibility for serving their products for 25 years. And if a fixture is taken out of service, it will be their responsibility to take it back and reuse it, and they say in the best possible way. So this is a big trend we're seeing in the industry of companies announcing that they're going to stand over their products for 20 or more years and service them and take them back. And in some cases, they're paying people to take them back. So that's a really interesting and a very laudable trend that we're seeing. Akademie has become one of the first major lighting manufacturers to publish product environmental or PEP eco passports of its products. This is the environmental declaration format, which is supported by Lighting Europe. And you're looking at the Lightshed pendant, which is one of the first product families with a published PEP eco passport. So you get a 12-page document with all the breakdown on the components and materials and all that type of thing, including the packaging. Now, yesterday, there was a meeting of lighting designers from across the world, and we were talking about a standard format for the profession to present environmental information on their projects. It's an ongoing project, and they're gathering information on generic products and on projects, and they're looking at how environmental data can be set out and compared to standardized products and projects. So that is all. That was part of the Life Cycle Analysis Incubator, which is a collaboration between the Green Light Alliance and the IALD's Lighting Industry Resource Council. And finally, Thorn Lighting has become the latest company to commit itself to climate neutrality, and it pledges to achieve this by 2025. So that's our news roundup for this month. And right onto the matter in hand, I'm going to hand over to Joel.
Hi, can you see me all right?
We can see you and hear you, Joel.
Perfect, thank you. So my name is Joel, and I represent Brighteco, and I'm here because Ray heard about our work in Sweden and reached out, and based on talking to you guys, and I got excited about how forward-thinking you seem to be. I'm thrilled to see what we all can talk about today. Short version of what Brighteco does is that we build a modular lamp with a focus on use of minimal use of virgin materials. Up until recently, we used a lot of optical components from old flat screens, and we use those fixtures to sell light as a service. Can move on to the next slide. And I mean, we're all here today because we want to figure out how to, how lighting can contribute to a sustainable future. And this graph is a representation of how Brighteco think about the future. What is it that we have to prepare for? At least, in the worst case scenario, if, maybe fusion power is around the corner, and in that case, this will look different. But for now, we will have less materials and we will have less energy to use. And we will have more problems. So more function needed and less resources to use. It doesn't really matter how circular something is if we, don't have the material to create and use it. Okay, move on to the next slide. And this is where the idea of selling a function rather than a product comes in. If experts like all of you guys are custodians of the materials and components that we use to create value, then you can be sure that it'll be in good care, and you will be able to solve any lighting need as efficiently as possible, because your buyer usually, they don't have permission to think outside of the box. They have a budget to buy a fixture, so they buy a fixture. When you sell light as a service, you have the right to solve this problem in more ways than one. Maybe we can get rid of that glossy white paint on the wall. Maybe we can change the thick curtains. Maybe we can leverage the existing hardware that you have in the ceiling already. Move on, please. Can move to the next slide. Yeah. And I mean, this is what Brighteco gets paid for. We get paid when a result is fulfilled. And as long as the customer pays, they have the light they need. And when they don't need it, the components get forwarded to someone else. And next slide. And we can continuously adjust this hardware as it's a modular product to whatever needs the customer have, whatever framework they have. But we always have this eye at the future, where do we believe these components can create most value for society tomorrow? I mean, it could be that we go from a school to an industry to a warehouse with these components, but we even think about, maybe they could be used in a completely different application. Could the optical components be used in a greenhouse? Could the driver be of better use, driving a heat pump? So that's what we try to build from the beginning. Lego components that can be used somewhere else. Next slide. And we're responsible today for about 10,000 square meters of light. It's mostly schools and preschools. And our process is that we start off with a visit to the site, understand the users, the situation they're in. For example, one installation, we came up of this really problematic ventilation, and the cleaners, they were not allowed to clean above 2.4 meters. And the light they had, the reason we're there, were bad, but their biggest issue was that a few students kept coughing in the room. So the ventilation randomly shot dust from the old pendants that they had. And with that in mind, we altered the fixtures we had planned to hang from the ceiling. Instead, we put them above the vents, and we changed the optics. We optimized it for high ceilings and weird angles. So basically, we used the same fixture, same service, but just slightly different parts. And so this is a decision we took with the buyer. We decided to use a bit more energy to get rid of the problem with the vents until they could fix it. And then we could change this installation to a more efficient installation. Next step in our process is that a couple of, not next slide. In our process, in Brighteco's process, is that a couple of months after we've done an installation, we come back and we refine it. It's an opportunity to do a lecture about what's in the ceiling, about circular economy, create this really concrete example for them to work from in other areas. And this is also where we get to make the light and experience, to influence the experience of light. And this is not rocket science. It's really just that we have the responsibility of great light and minimal use of material and energy every day, every year. And because of that, we get to work on the experience continuously. So one of our first installations, it's a preschool and really small children. And after this installation, we realized that they had problems with the group being really loud when it was lunchtime, and they had a hard time falling asleep during nap time. And I mean, you all know that we can definitely influence behavior with light. So we used that, and the relationship we had built with the user to solve the problem. We did all the basic things, switched the color temperature and controls in the dining room, and added capability to switch colors in the nap room, color temperature, sorry. But we did not over-install from the start. We were able to upgrade this initial installation with the least possible added hardware to meet the actual needs that the users had because of this approach. And I mean, just changing the color temperature and design, it will do a bit, but when we can have a little talk explaining how much this affects them, and we can exaggerate that, we can create this experience for them. We can ask them to talk to the kids about it, and it really does make an impact. We can influence this experience by dialogue as much as with lux or color rendering, or making sure that it's glare free. So through that one interaction and exchange, we created this really positive attitude around the way the user were able to be a part of creating this environment for themselves. And I mean, they're still telling me today that this works great. And this is a really long time ago we put this in. And after that, we do yearly follow-ups and continuous adjustments like this. When it comes to a bigger change or big expansion, we talk to the buyer, but basically they outsource all service and smaller improvements to us and our vertically integrated value chain. Can move on, please. The first procurement, public procurement of light as a function in Sweden, that I know of at least, was in a town called Bollnäs. And I apologize, it's Swedish articles in the background. I just realized you can read that, but it got a lot of attention. What they did was that they started off with a dialogue, they invited all the contractors and manufacturers that they thought could, give them some insight in how much flexibility they could ask for, what are reasonable environmental requirements. They basically said, we know the result we want. We want great light, but we're not experts on light. We don't know this industry. So we just want to ask that. How do we ask that? And figure it out. And then they just asked us to, give us a price to solve our lighting needs over a 5-year period within this framework that we created. And they, as all of our customers, feel more like a project partner than a customer. We're trying to figure out how to make them the best light experience for the least amount of materials and energy. And it's not only figuring out how to make the budget department understand why the operational costs are different, or how to talk to contractors that are already within the system. Because all that nitty-gritty stuff, that's what's hard, that's what changes with a new model. But it's also about solving these systemic problems together in an agile way. I just had a discussion about lowering temperatures like Celsius or Fahrenheit in a building, and maybe meeting that with adjusting the color temperature to create an experience that is actually warmer than it is. So that's a few examples of how we work. And as Ray said, I'm happy to discuss questions later on. And I believe it's you can move on. Yes, sorry. I believe it's Sophie that are from Trilux that are about to speak now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Hello, everybody. Today I want to talk about refurbishing custom luminaires. So what I call BC luminaires, before circularity. And I'll explain why I'm going to choose this subject. Firstly, I've had a lot of experience where customers want to refurbish standard general purpose luminaires that were always perhaps bargain basement luminaires the first time round. And we soon discover it's actually not possible economically to refurbish them. So if you like, the sustainability scruples soon go out the window. But there are a certain genre of luminaires that are very viable to do this. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So next slide, please, Suzanne. So the first thing we have to do when we receive such an inquiry is to do a quick technical and commercial evaluation. So we need to think about, okay, you want to refurbish this luminaire, but if I refurbish this luminaire, will it actually perform as required? Will it actually meet current legislation, standards, and electrical safety, for instance? And can this luminaire be refurbished for the less cost than a new replacement? And this I found actually to be probably the most common gateway that you've got to try and get through, because if the answer is no, but you will have a more sustainable luminaire at the end of it, then usually on cost grounds, then that luminaire will probably go straight to recycling and just be replaced with a new product. And leading from that is economies of scale as well, because quite often the solution has to be developed. So we need to know how many luminaires will require refurbishment, because some upfront work may be required at risk and the project may not go ahead. So that money will have to be absorbed. And also the outcome, what are we delivering? If we're going to do a refurbishment of a luminaire, it's usually a kit to take it from A to B. And is this work going to be done by installing this kit back at base in a workshop or a factory, maybe a sort of a remote refurbishment, take the luminaires from site, bring them back? Or are we going to do this under workshop conditions, or are we going to produce a kit with instructions so that an electrician can actually do the refurbishment on site and therefore take out the transportation to a workshop and back, which again saves on carbon and energy and probably cost as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we need to start off initially and develop our business case for this work to go ahead. So we need to benchmark the existing installation, such as it is. So what we need to do is look at the existing lighting quality. Is it actually where it needs to be in terms of the application and the standards and possibly the legislation as to where we are today? Because we could be looking at a lighting installation 20 to 30 years old that was designed at the time to very different standards and expectations. We also need to benchmark the existing energy consumption so that we know how much light energy is being used at this point in time, because that will be a powerful driver for the project to go ahead when we show the before and after energy consumption, hopefully. And also we need to understand if the luminaire positions are fixed and governed by the existing installation, the electrical installation that may be retained and not replaced. So it may be the luminaires have to go back in exactly the same position, and therefore we can't move them around when we're modelling or perhaps plotting how this project might work. Another thing to watch out for, which catches a lot of people out, is incorporated emergency lighting. It's one thing taking a luminaire down and refurbishing it, but if it has emergency lighting in it as well, that has to be considered and reinstated. Otherwise, the building would be non-compliant with its emergency lighting. And also possibly lighting controls have been incorporated in the luminaire that may need reinstating. Next slide, please. So looking at the output from a typical benchmark simulation, what we have here is a project, and the table below is where benchmarking was carried out on site. So we measured illuminance, uniformity, looked at cylindrical illuminance. Was it even existing? Was it compliant? Not necessary to do on this particular project a UGR study, because it's a double uplighter, so it doesn't really be affected by UGR calculations because the light sources are not facing downwards. And then from an electrical point of view, we looked at luminaire efficacy, and on this particular project, these are double uplighters. We worked out that it was about 28.6 luminaire lumens per circuit watt, which if you turn it into watts per square meter and look at power density, it's around about 24.5 watts per square meter, which by today's standards are an epic fail. And then if we look at the results of the simulation we did initially to develop the business case, where we did some modeling, we looked at, again, at the illuminance as to what the upgrade components might deliver through this luminaire and how it would affect a typical space. We looked at the uniformity. We could look at cylindrical illuminance. We, again, not too concerned about UGR, although there was some reflectance from the white surfaces. So we just did some peripheral work there just to make sure there wouldn't be excessive reflectance that could cause discomfort glare. And then we also looked at luminaire efficacy if we were to upgrade them and what that did. And as you can see, there's quite a significant improvement there, certainly in the design stage, predicted improvements there, where we're actually now up at 120 luminaire lumen circuit watts. So even by today's standards, the latest Part L, we're way above the 95 LLCW that we would need, so a degree of future proofing there, and also the watts per square meter has come right down as well. So this gave us the basis to understand that technically it was feasible to refurbish these luminaires, and also that it would bring real benefits to the customer and the project, because not only would we be reducing the power, they would be getting refurbished luminaires and also better lighting quality than they had before. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? So once we decide on paper, at least, that the project is commercially and technically viable, then we need to take an existing luminaire and basically tear it down and see exactly how it's constructed. And in this case, the manufacturer had since gone out of business, although there were some engineering drawings on site for the luminaires, but certainly there was no existing manufacturer to speak to. So we did tear down one of each type of luminaires, and we then looked at our options in terms of physical space, what light sources could we fit, and also the attendant drivers. Would the finished solution be ROHS and REACH compliant in terms of the salvaged materials? And also what the option were to replace the drivers. Would it be integral to the luminaire, or would it be a remote driver? Also, the condition of the diffuser as well. Quite often these discolor over time, usually UV or cyclic heat damage. So could the diffuser be reused had it gone brittle? So these are all considerations as well, because it forms part of the refurbished luminaire. And also the condition of the luminaire body. In some cases, if the room has been redecorated several times, there may be paint splashes on it, or it may be corrosion even and discoloration. So all of these aesthetics have to be considered as well. And at this point as well, you could also calculate the actual or probably estimated embodied carbon in the luminaire, and then your carryover. So your new solution, once you've completed it, should have a very low embodied carbon figure as opposed to building a new luminaire, which is one of the key advantages as well for the customer. Next slide, please, Suzanne. So challenges along the way that you might find once you start doing this work and building prototypes. You need to think about the thermodynamics of what you're doing. Just because we're working with LED light sources, which appear to run quite cool, say, compared to tungsten halogen or some fluorescent light sources, there is still heat to dissipate. So probably your customer is going to want at least a 5-year warranty on the refurbished luminaires. So what you don't want really is luminaires that fail after, say, year 1, 2, or 3 of operation, because you're probably going to have to pick up the bill at your own expense on that one, which probably is not good for business. So you would need to do some thermodynamic modeling of your prototypes to actually see where the heat's going and whether it's acceptable, and whether it would be cool enough to make sure that the luminaire should, in theory, last at the warranty period and beyond. So that's the first challenge that has to be overcome. And certainly I've found with LED components and drivers, it sounds simple, but it's not always that simple, because there is still heat generated and it can damage the components prematurely if it can't escape or be heat sunk effectively. Next slide, please. And once we overcome that, we then need to think about the light quality that the new luminaire is going to deliver. Again, just fitting an LED light source in an existing luminaire doesn't mean the photometry will be the same as the luminaire and the existing or original lamp that you've just taken out. So yeah, it sounds easy. Yes, we can physically get an LED light source in. Let's do that. It'll be okay. It'll use less energy, but LED light tends to travel in very straight lines. So Again, with your prototype, you are going to need to do some photometry on it and actually see where the light's going to go, and when it's reinstalled, will it actually improve, at least maintain the quality of light in the space, but if required, as I said earlier, perhaps to come up to a more recent standard or requirement, perhaps a higher illumination level, better uniformity, lower UGR, then you need to check this in a photometry laboratory and do some modeling before you present the prototypes back to the customer for sign off. So again, it's important that you do the photometry, and part of that will be to create some modeling files as well so that checks can be done. So you'll probably need access to a UCAS approved laboratory if you're doing this in the UK. Next slide, please. So just to sum up here, the conclusions learned that, you know, having done many of these projects now, not all luminaire refurbishment is viable at today's date. Now, the reason I say at today's date, future geopolitical factors regarding virgin materials may change that. So it may not be economically viable to refurbish certain luminaires that we're presented with today, but maybe in a few years' time, if materials become scarcer and therefore the prices go up, then suddenly it could become financially attractive. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Refurbishing for reuse in an existing building is something to consider, or are we refurbishing for resale? So you have to know what the end game is here. Usually it's refurbishing for use in an existing building, although I believe it's being done for resale as well. There should be an energy saving if you get the prototyping correct. And again, it's important to explain to the customer from the benchmarking what the energy saving is predicted to be, because that will be a major point for making a decision for the project to go ahead as well, particularly as energy prices are currently rising quite rapidly. From a technical point of view, you need to look at thermal stability versus time, so that, you know, your solution is actually going to work over the expected amount of time and not self-destruct prematurely because you got the thermodynamics wrong. And also the lighting quality of the refurbished luminaire. Is it equal or better to the original luminaire? Because again, it's quite easy to get that wrong, particularly with downlighters. I've seen wide angle downlighters being refurbished with LED light sources, which are basically very narrow beam outputs. And in one reception area, we went from a reasonably well lit area with CFLs to something that was just a series of spots on the floor with very narrow beam LED light sources, which was absolutely useless. Compliant product outcome as well. In doing this refurbishment, you need to be aware as well that you are reselling a luminaire, you are responsible for it, and therefore it needs to conform with all current electrical safety legislation in the UK. So therefore you're probably expected to give it a UKCA or a UKNI compliance certificate as well. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'll now hand over to John Bowden.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Hi, I'm John from Silent Design. I'm just going to be talking about our project that we refurbished a whole lot of lights at Bree up in Watford. As you know, Bree are the people that do all the BREEAM assessments. So I'm just going to go through the slides and we'll go from there. Right, so what do we need to consider for the refurbishment of light fittings? Like Sophie said, there's lots of considerations. So I'm just going to go through some of the ones that we looked at for this project. One of the big things I believe you need to make your stakeholders understand that they're getting the same light fitting. So it's going to look the same. They're going to spend a lot of money and it's going to look the same as they had it before. Do you know what I mean? So the light fittings are the same. They're going to look the same. There's not a lot of difference, which is something sort of people need to understand because, you know, like I say, they're spending a load of money and they kind of need to get to grips with that. For the manufacturers, you know, you've got to take some of the lights back and then, you know, examine the fitting. How easy is it to take apart and put together? Is there corrosion on screws that, you know, it doesn't allow it to come apart, and all that sort of kind of thing, like plastics, are they brittle? Do they break when you take them off? So you can see if it's actually viable to refurbish these light fittings. Another important consideration is if you're doing controls is if what wiring infrastructure is already in the building. So if they've just got switching 3-4 core, wiring, or do they actually have DALI 5-6 core? What's going on in the building? Is it, can you refurbish it? Can you put wireless controls in, for instance, or is it DALI lighting control system in there already? So you can kind of work around that. How easy is it for the contractor to remove and install? So you've got to make it easy for them. So if in this case, these are suspended light fittings, so we had to come up with a solution that was easy for the contractor to sort of leave all the cabling and all the suspension wires in place, take the light fitting down, send them back, and then we could send them back and they could just put them up again. It was going to be quite simple. So you need to consider that. Always think about the contractor, how easy it's going to be for them. Is there enough space in the light fitting to mount all the new proposed gear? Because you try and put sensors in light fittings or controls or DALI drivers or whatever. Is there actually space in that light fitting to install that sort of LED light source and that LED driver, which is quite important, because it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. Can new parts be made to replace failing bits? That's quite important, like say for plastic diffusers, or other bits. Can you 3D print some maybe, or can you make up new aluminium parts? There's lots of sort of considerations if things need to be replaced after they've degraded over many years of use. Transporting and packing of lights to and from site. So if you're taking the lights down, transporting them back, again, one for more of the manufacturers, but you're going to have cardboard boxes for your standard products, but you won't have cardboard boxes for these products that you're taking down and transporting. So how are you going to do that? It just needs to be thought about a little bit, I find. How will lighting lux levels be achieved? So obviously, what Sophie was talking about, you've got to go through an approved ACAS test laboratory once your fitting has been upgraded to test, so you can get some proper photometrics out of it. Emergency light levels from a liability point of view is really important, obviously from insurance and all that kind of stuff. So you need these LDT files, made up. Otherwise, you could be in trouble down the line. And what other standards should you meet? So obviously, for remanufactured BS 8887 is quite important. Obviously, all the electrical standards, UKCA, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, let's jump in. I'll show you what we did in this project. So this is the existing layout of the lighting. This is the second floor. They had power feed to the lights here. You can see it's fed all the way through, so it's through wired all the way through from that one point left and right. And there were 90 suspended lights, 1x28 watt fluorescent T5s with louver optics. All right, so that was the second floor. We had the first floor. Same light fitting, different ceiling, looks lovely. Again, 90 suspended lights, and they were fed through one point left and right through wiring. All right, so it's quite important, and it was all 3 and 4 core wiring. This is the transport. So when I said think about the transport, basically there's a bunch of floor tiles that were left over from this project, and basically we just used them as packing for the lights going to and from site. So there was we didn't create any cardboard, we didn't create any plastic, we didn't create anything. We just used existing waste as packing to transport these lights to and from site, which was, it's very economical. There were one thing we had to replace on the light fittings was the joiners and the end caps. All right, so they had these old brittle plastic joiners and end caps that just was breaking. You can see it's all chipped. Basically, we had to re-engineer joiners and end caps, and this was locally done. So the engineer that it was 5 miles away from us, and it's only 28 miles away from us to site. So it was quite a sort of a low carbon sort of journey for us to make. And these have got slots. You'll see the slots in it, and basically these were for the suspension wires, which were left in situ. So the lights came down, suspension wires left in, and these modules just came at the top. So that's that. And then you see the joiners between the lights. These are what we use. So basically it all slotted and nicely. It was well engineered. The joiners, the end caps were a little bit of a surprise. They were actually that profile of the light is actually asymmetric. So one side was slightly different to the other side, which was something we sort of found out a bit later on. So we had to have left and right-handed end caps, which is a bit of a strange one, but we got around it. It was all good. Basically with the lights, a lot of them, the majority of them were up and down lights. Some were just down light only, but obviously we made new aluminium plates, 2mm thick aluminium for the LED boards. And we put a cover over the LED boards because they're over 60 volts. Another consideration was the emergency lighting, because there was a 4-meter distance between the lights, and they've got a louver, which, you know, most people remember the old days, louvers cut off at about 65 degrees angle. So since the great distance between the lights and the louver optics meant basically you were getting 0 lux between the rows of lights. So we'd have to use a lot of emergency packs in the scheme to get a compliant, you know, half lux level. So what we did is we actually used standalone emergency spot, which had 110 degree coverage, which was absolutely amazing. And we used a lot less batteries, which is, you know, part of the environmental argument on this project. And that's a little shot showing the little emergency spot integrated into the light frame. You can see it is bright, and we were quite impressed. Over to the top right, you can see it just fits in the profile. Again, talking about what fits in the profile, this was a great little product. We're super happy with it. And of course, because it's its own emergency spot, it's got its own photometrics, so we didn't have to go through that. Yeah, so it had about 450 lumens, it had lithium ion batteries, so it was a long service life. And you can read all about that in the slides after this. Right, like I mentioned, we had everything tested, so we went through Lux TSI for this over in Wales, and they came back, and I mean, the headline figure here really is we've got 135 lumens per watt, which is, you know, really amazing from a louvered fitting. So we were well happy about that. Right, so basically what we did with the fitting, it got complicated really, because we were using wireless controls and DALI bits and pieces. It was quite busy. So basically we used Tridonic ADV5 LED boards, which are one of the most highly efficient LED boards you can get on the market at the moment. Like I said, we had that emergency spots with the Lifey PO4 batteries for long service life, high output. We had a DALI LED driver in there because, you know, you can replace DALI. Anybody's DALI driver will work in that fitting. So from a maintenance point of view, it will work really, really well. We had Kasambi wireless controls through Tridonic. So every light had its own little node, little number. So we could individually control every light, which was important for Cat B later on. And then we've got a DALI 2 wired PIR. So in essence, you can use anybody's DALI 2 PIR later on. If that PIR fails, you can just replace that. And then through wiring, so both sides of the fitting had a plug and a socket either end. And so the contractor, when they were putting it back up, they could just plug it in, job done. There was no wiring to be done, which is, you know, super efficient. And then obviously, you know, using Kasambi, it's nice for the end user. I don't know if you guys have used Kasambi before, but it's very good for its ease of use, and, you know, so it just works really, really well. And like I say, with the DALI drivers, that's replaceable from a maintenance point of view in the future as well. So 3D model on the left, actual image on the right. So using the modeling photometrics that we got from Lux TSI, you can see in the image on the right, you can actually see on the bottom of the images, the actual light and dark spots on the floor almost match up with the 3D model. So it was pretty realistic. The results we got from the testing lab and what we actually got in real life were pretty damn similar. So we were very happy about that. This just shows you what we did for the OEM manual. So this is the second floor up the top. They have different groups down the bottom. Everything was arranged in different groups. We had a corridor group, and each light's got, like I say, it's got its own Kasambi node. It's got little emergency packs labeled up where the sensors are. You know, nice and easy for the end user. When they go to use their Kasambi app on their phone or whatever, they can reconfigure and they can say, oh, I want this PIR with that light. And it's very simple for them to do. So that's what we did for them for their controls. It's just an image showing the actual end result. just showing how small, we were lucky to find a small Dali 2 PIR that was just tiny, that fitted into the profile, the integrated emergency spot, the joiners, they look quite nice and quite discreet. So we were super happy with the result, and so was the customer. We also did some track spots. These were Erco track spots with a compact fluorescent lamp in them. Basically we had some custom heat sinks made up and put a 10-watt Cree LED chip in there. And then that was a little bit of an opal diffuser. Nice little thing. It was just some more decorative. So we didn't photometry test those because that was just decorative in a couple of little areas. So they were just nice little sort of gentle spots essentially. So energy saving wise for this project, we had a 30% reduction in energy, which was really amazing. I think we had a 20% increase in light output as well for the same energy consumption. And basically the waste we saved about 90, we had 92 kilos of waste on this job. So we threw out a load of ballast, wiring, bits and pieces. And we saved 252 kilograms of existing lighting bodies going to waste. So all the aluminium bodies and the louvers and everything, that was about 252 kilograms, which we saved. Future waste, if we replace them with new lights, that would be another 216 kilograms of aluminium, and there'd be 216 meters roughly of new plastic linear, to go in the ceiling for the linear lights that you'd replace them with. Interesting point. We I actually suggested to Bree if we change the louver for a plastic diffuser, and because they're quite environmentally conscious as a client, they said no, we'll just keep the louver, less waste, less plastics in the environment, and it worked out really well for them, to be fair. And lastly, I just want to play a little video because we did this. This is just showing the lights sort of coming on and off with the Kasambi app. So it just shows you just all sort of little controls and all groups of things. So that's the old, corridor hold and bits and pieces like this. This is during the commissioning phase. So some of them aren't quite exactly right, but that's it. And also want to mention that this actually won a Build Back Better Green Award just recently. So we're super happy with that. Us and Tridonic went in, and yeah, we're very happy that it's probably one of the greenest project I can think of at the moment. So yeah, very happy. So there you go. All right, now thanks for that. And now I just want to introduce Jonathan Rush from Hawley.
Thank you very much. I think I'm switching over. I can't see my video, but I'm sure that's fine. Hello, everyone. Thanks ever so much. Suzanne, we're going to have to jump through some of these slides, so trigger finger at the ready if you can. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm Jonathan Rush, Director of, that's fine. Director of Lighting Design at Hawley, and I'm going to be talking about lighting design in what I call the carbon age. And I do this, if we move to the next slide, I do this very much with my tongue in my cheek, but everything changes, and industries change as technologies change. As things that we want to explore, it changes. And if we move to the next slide, for example, art changes. And I sort of suggest that maybe we're in that period of change now. I've worked in the lighting design industry for 23 years. And right now I feel we're in probably the biggest change we've ever seen in the carbon age, as we move with change being driven and demanded, not just by our clients or our collaborators, but also by the people we work with, our own teams who want more meaning, want to feel they're doing something for the climate emergency. If we move on.
John, I'm going to give you control because it worked fine for John. So I'm going to hand over control to you to drive them. Is that
perfect?
Yeah, okay.
How do I do this?
I'm just handing over now, okay? Got it? Just start driving them forward now.
Aha, perfect. So why must we change? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, but it doesn't hurt to run through. In 2015, the IPCC sort of set a broad target for global warming at about 1.5 degrees. And if you look at the sort of impacts of 1.5 degrees C warming on the right there, they're pretty horrific. As it happens, if we hit our current net zero commitments, we might get to 2 degrees, and they have really bigger, much bigger impacts. Just a 0.5 degree extra warming can you know, like 99% of our coral reefs lost, etc. One of the things that worries everyone at the moment is that 1.5 degree warming might be coming very quicker, much quicker than we ever thought. And if we're in that kind of tick-tock moment, if we don't make really big changes quite quickly in the next 5 to 10 years to our practices, we could be hitting somewhere between about 4 degrees, and things could spiral out of all control, and various feedback loops kick in, and we could hit 4 degrees. And it's generally accepted and predicted that if we get anywhere near that, civilization as we know it would be very hard to consider existing. So we really do need to make big changes. And as a lighting industry, you know, it's in our hands to do so. 15 to 20% of global energy is used by lighting, and about 5% of global CO2 emissions is related to electric light. So 5% is a big chunk, and something that we can control and take and minimize in some ways. Interestingly, as humans, we actually make up a really, really small amount of the total biomass of the Earth, sort of 2.5% of animal biomass, 0.01% of plants and animal biomass. So we're a really small percentage of the planet. We make a big impact. So, and if we're going to hit some of the commitments that we need to make in terms of net zero, so these are total building and new building emissions in kilograms CO2 per meter squared. If you look at the current benchmarks versus where we need to get to, standards and what we install with lighting is going to change dramatically, and we really need to be thinking about what we put in and changing our general practices to hit those targets. So we need to change. How do we change? It feels to me like we need to change our general approaches, we need to change our vocabulary, and we need to change the metrics that we use. So how do we measure success? In the past, we probably looked at illuminance, color rendering, general cost, energy in terms of wattages. We might need to start thinking a lot more about the carbon cost, how the circular credentials, you know, perhaps well-being, perhaps environmental and social impact. Lots of changes, lots of metric changes required to do what we need to do. We need to think about carbon as a life cycle for a project. So we've probably all seen these general stages of life cycle of carbon, from A to D, where A is the production stage, then you go through in use, end of life, to recycling at the end. As mentioned previously, the route to this is the life cycle analysis of a product. And this life cycle analysis gives us values in kilograms of CO2 equivalent for that product during production stage, throughout construction, in use, and at the end of life, where hopefully some of that material can move back into the raw material supply chain. So if we think carbon, we need to think about our processes. We need to think about how we design at the very beginning, design consciously, set the parameters that we want to hit. We need to reduce what we specify and design for longevity and design for change. We need to minimize in-use energy and repair and refurbish product as we go. And we need to design for reuse, repurpose, and recycle. So a lot of change in the thought processes are required. So I'm going to just quickly run through a quick case study with you. This was a project where a client had 4 stories of their own office that they were refurbishing. We were talking about lighting design. The client challenged us very much to think about what we can do to be more environmentally friendly. The project itself includes obviously front of house spaces, breakout spaces, you know, really nice, well-designed office spaces, and we were working and have been working with the interior designers on those. But this area particularly is the working spaces, and we went through lots of conversations and lots of iterations. Whilst 600 by 600 is not normally our go-to, it became clear that the ceilings were to remain, and therefore we would have to replace these products that you can see here in the existing old fluorescent technology. But we didn't really want to just replace them, so we worked with a manufacturer, and here you can see a sort of blurred contractor's photo as they're going in. But what we managed to do was upgrade them with LED technology, which allowed us to reduce the quantity of products because they were more efficient and they could achieve the same amount of illumination. But we also worked on this system where the housing of the luminaire remained in place and the unit just sort of clipped in, a new LED unit clipped in. So it takes about 5 minutes for older unit out, new unit in, and the new unit is all obviously fully photometered and fully working. And we believe we estimate we've saved 4 kilograms of steel per luminaire, which over the 800 or so products that there were, we estimate probably saved about 6.5 tons of CO2 equivalent hitting the stratosphere, as it were. So just to put into your mind's eye what a metric ton of CO2 is, it's like a big balloon about 10.7 meters high, so 6.7 of those. So quite a big impact. A little bit of extra cost, but the client was bought into the process and they challenged us in the first place, so they had to see it through. Obviously, moving from fluorescent to LED, we saved a great deal of energy just in terms of watts per meter squared and luminaire lumens per watt. But the new metrics that we have allowed us, with these EPDs, allowed us to do carbon comparisons for one project versus another. So what you can see is there's the new product, the refurbished product, and the existing product. And we were able to look at those in terms of their embodied carbon in the initial stages and in use. Ignore these last two values because actually there's a calculation error. But this shows how we could use those metrics to actually to measure that embodied carbon or estimate that embodied carbon over a 20-year life cycle. And what you can see is, whilst the refurbished product has an initial jump where the embodied carbon of the product comes in, over a life cycle through in use, which makes up a huge majority of the actual carbon that's embedded within projects, we could show and demonstrate significant savings. Obviously, the new product also being LED technology with better control allowed us the concept of daylight dimming, and if we daylight dimming and PIR sensors as well. So if we even estimate that we can get to about a third saving, again, you can see that that makes a real chunk difference over the life cycle of the luminaire in terms of embodied carbon. And these new metrics that we're learning as we go through these processes will become the full metrics that we might use in the future for projects. Just in terms of daylight dimming, it's one of the things that, you know, we talk about in-use carbon being such a huge thing. For a similar project, we built this, we used a software program. We built an iterative model that essentially reverse engineered electric light use based on daylight availability, with a view that if the daylight was providing a working illumination level, then you didn't need the electric light. And just as an example, this office floors pay 3.81 watts per meter squared. We estimate through our iterative modeling that if we put in daylight sensors and daylight link dimming in the zones as indicated, we could save about 75% of that energy. So, you know, there's embodied carbon, but the in-use carbon as well is something that we need to really consider as an industry as we move forward. So it's really important that we go through the process of putting everything through this lens of its impact on people and planet. This project was just one example, driven by the client, driven by us and our need. These new metrics are going to become part of the lexicon of how we work. I remember we had to do the same when LED came in. When LED technology came into the lighting design market, it changed everything and about how we approach stuff. And you know, this carbon drive, low carbon, net zero carbon is going to be the same. It's going to change everything we do. And at Hawley, we are completely re-evaluating our service so that we make sure that we are doing our best for the planet and for people, creating the most human-centric and planet-conscious spaces that we can. We call it our North Star, and we kind of hope it will be a model for lighting design as we move forward. And on that note, I am done, and I will hand over. I believe I have to relinquish control and hand over to Benz.
Hi, Benz, you've got control now, okay?
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Jonathan. Very inspiring talk. How do I use the I got it. Thank you. We've been very fortunate to design an exhibition lighting actually for an exhibition in the Barbican Center here, which is called Our Time on Earth, and it's actually, let's go to the next slide, an exhibition about the climate crisis, and the curators wanted to kind of convey a very kind of positive message, and invited, I think, around 20 artists to kind of make pieces of what they thought would be better technology, better views for the future, all driven from a kind of positive aspect, and they wanted to kind of show the idea that things can also be done better, but rather than a doom and gloom scenario, they were keen to present their artworks a future that is also positive. The exhibition was guest curated by Caroline Till and Kate Franklin, which wrote the book Radical Matters, which I can really advise everyone to read, because it talks all about new, more sustainable materials. One of the interesting things from the exhibition is that from the outset, they wanted to create a very bright space. And obviously, we felt, as an exhibition design, it's always much more about ambience and atmosphere. But we wanted to kind of play with that as well, to kind of create, really, really dark spaces, very light spaces. And we figured out we want to try to create a combination where you, enjoy the experience and kind of save energy. So by example, obviously you could create spaces that are much more focused on objects. So you don't need to light the whole space. For granted, for an exhibition, it's much easier to do than an office floor space. But still, that was the kind of route that we were going to take. And also, what's really interesting, Universal Design Studio designed the exhibition with loads of new kind of materials, like Honex and hemp fiber boards and all kind of organic materials, if you can imagine. And I think for us as a lighting design, it's really interesting because there were so many kind of screen-based contents, and how to balance the screen against the the kind of natural material. So in an ideal world, to say maybe at some point we question, there's so many screens around. Do we actually need lighting, and just to leave the whole space dark? But then you can realize there's no more lighting into the background at all. So we did keep the lighting. And here you start seeing this example. This is a strategy we start to take. This is an artwork by Liam Young. He makes beautiful kind of sculptures and put them in a cinematic setting. And we took some of them. As you can see on the photos on the bottom right, he has this kind of he's in a project called Planet City, where he envisages the entire world population living in a relatively large city with billions of people, but the rest of the planet is essentially all left to go wild and is all given back to ecology and nature. And so all the people live in this kind of enclave city. And the idea is to combine all cultures of the world in this constant carnival celebration. And this is what you see here. And one thing was really interesting is we're trying to take the kind of lighting approach as this kind of very brutal lighting into the exhibition, as you can see here with the kind of strip lights. But it also shows the challenge that we had in the exhibition. You're going to see, actually, there's all these video screens, and then bring out the kind of beautiful, the natural texture. What we are very surprised by as a kind of an exhibition lighting, because you would expect that every kind of museum and institution have their equipment ready, all the tracks and all the lights are there. But it turned out that that doesn't, and hopefully I don't offend anybody from the Barbican here, but it turns out that they buy new lighting equipment for each every exhibition. They were like, "What? That is really strange." So one of the first things we said, well, actually, just reuse the equipment you have instead of throwing it away, and then only buy new luminaires. So which we did. The exhibition is meant to travel around. So one of the first elements we discussed with them, obviously your fixture, what I guess brings it in very sharp focus, because an exhibition is obviously a temporary element. It's not a long cycle. It's only there for a few months, and then what happens next? This exhibition travels around, but we wanted to kind of explained to them, well, actually, fixtures could travel with it, or you could do something else in your museum. You don't have to throw these things away. You can readjust that and take them for other future exhibitions. Because obviously your LED life is so much longer than just a small period of the exhibition. And even if I think this exhibition travels around the world for like 5 years, it will be, at least 10 years for your LEDs to go with it. So have another use of it. They had a whole a series of I think Sora fittings that were already around, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is actually quite a good system. But we supplemented all their existing lighting set with new equipment we have to do. And I guess a very logical choice for us was to kind of use the ZTA from Stone Lighting. And obviously, Stone Lighting is such a spearheading the circular economy, and all their the ZTA is one of the first fully circular products, as you know, on the UK market. We took that and worked with them to get an assessment of the whole exhibition. And granted, this is obviously an exhibition; it's very, very, very small and short. But we had this opportunity because Stone Lighting is working with Napier University and Dr. Ray Molony to kind of get an analysis of not only what an individual the circularity of individual products are, but also the carbon of the entire installation, which was for us as a lighting design studio that mainly really focus on experiences of people, and have always kind of more shied away from this kind of engineering approach, a real eye-opener. So this Ray Molony could calculate the overall embodied carbon of the entire installation with all the product choices, and that's been really an interesting process for us, because obviously then you kind of start to realize that every design decision you make has an impact on the overall embodied carbon and circularity of the exhibition. So especially for us, as kind of, we have never really thought about breaking down equipment, and for us it was a kind of real change in mindset in the end. She also broke down the luminaire compartments, and I thought this really interesting from the start, because obviously there's the luminaire housing, but then there's also all the electronic components that go with it, which for us is a kind of a mystery. I mean, the image you see here is they smashed an elbow driver to pieces and trying to kind of take these things apart and actually look inside the electronic components, what actually happens in there. And it's worth considering this, because as we found is that the contribution, if you go back to the slide, is once you put in this, if you don't think about, drivers that are attached to luminaires, the picture always looks a little bit better than actually once you put the drivers in. But for us, I think the biggest thing we've learned, and I think comparatively, because we're obviously lucky to have this exhibition where other designers than the lighting designers think about the climate crisis in depth, is that ultimately it's really about the mindset. And if I make a quote from climate activist Clover Hogan, which says, solving climate change is not your responsibility because it's outside your control. What you're responsible is the thing inside your control. Indeed, the only thing that has been inside your control, your mindset. And I think that is, I guess, what we all have to do as lighting design practices. And I think what Jonathan really good explained is that inevitable change, which starts how we actually think about things. There's also something really interesting. What we kind of learned, I guess, is what's the next step of the circularity. And we always know there's a very interesting movement about regenerative design ongoing, and thinking about the broader perspective of what products could be. A quote here, a quote by Sarah Ichiraka, who just wrote an amazing book about regenerative design. But the thing is, she gives an example about the shampoo bottle, that actually, if you're a manufacturer of a shampoo bottle, you should start to think, what can the river benefit from the shampoo, where the shampoo obviously ultimately ends up. And I think that's almost how we start thinking about products and in lighting as well. You kind of think about the end. which for us is a completely different way of thinking. And I have to be honest, I think as a studio, we're a little bit behind on that. But some of the materials, the biomaterials, are actually really interesting. This is the exhibition. They showed this. Obviously, we all know the miscellaneum mushroom materials, but it's actually quite encouraging that IKEA found out, the image on the right, already start using this mushroom-based biomaterial as a packaging material, so they don't use Sterifine as much anymore. And what's interesting is that makes you wonder whether, for example, where all luminaires still need to be made from aluminium in the first place, or can you reduce that compound and make it out of a biomaterial as much as you can? Does everything always have to be steel and aluminium? Because that might solve a problem from the start. We obviously know there's already miscellaneum decorative pendants around, but maybe it's great if drivers are housed in miscellaneum boxes rather than plastic or steel boxes in the first place. So I think as a conclusion to this this exhibition, we were incredibly lucky to work with obviously Mike Stone and especially Irene Matsei, which kind of helped us giving this kind of overview insights from a kind of scientific point of view, and then the creative insights from the the kind of people, the artists that did the exhibit. So I think for us, it just kind of made us realize that we start to think about as a studio, as a practice, that all think about really experiential driven studio, have to really focus on this kind of more the circular thinking that most of you already do, and how we can actually think about the beyond use of the solution. And I wanted to end up with this slide that unfortunately we not designed, but this is a luminaire and made by Cruel Design in Milan, which is fully 3D printed out of 5 Sicilian oranges. So it's the weight of oranges actually creating luminaires. And it goes back to this kind of challenge, I guess, is whether you have to use always the kind of steel and plastics for luminaires, but maybe the future could lie in biomaterials. And on that note, I want to thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your questions if you have any. Thank you very much. And I hand my note back to you, Suzanne. Can you grab control back, or do you need to give it to you?
Thank you, Ben. That's okay. If I could invite the rest of the panel to sort of to join us again on video and on microphones. And yeah, we still have the Q&A box there if you want to pop in any questions, comments, or your thoughts on anything you've heard. But thank you guys for the valuable insights and sharing those hard-won lessons from those projects you've worked on. Now, one thing I'm interested in is that we have metrics, some would say too many, for products and embedded carbon and all the rest of it, and life cycle assessment of product, but we don't really have metrics to describe or to compare projects. And I'm wondering, do you guys have any thoughts on that? Is it embodied carbon per meter squared, or what is it? So yeah, designers amongst you, Benz, do you think is there a sort of a metric we could use for, or do you need that, or would that be useful?
I think on metrics, it's always very tricky to start comparing like for like scenarios, because you can obviously only compare, a lobby against a lobby, a workplace against a workplace, and these kind of scenarios. But yes, you can then start almost, what you already have now, for example, the kind of energy watts per square meter, or that 100 lux per square meter, that they're a good comparison. So I think in that sense you could. I would challenge the idea of metrics. I think the biggest challenge in metrics, in our view, is this idea of illuminance versus luminance, if you like, because in a way, luminance always is driven by kind of just light that falls on the surface, as you know, the lux values, and the corridor has to be 150 lux and offers 500 lux and all these kind of things. But actually, when you start to think about brightness that you actually perceive, maybe there's a better metrics to use, because you can think, actually, this black wall behind me, if you think about well standards, for example, it would be much better if this actually was a white wall. And if you light the same wall with the same, you need less light to illuminate it will positively. So I think there's a lot of savings to be made if you start looking at candelas per meter square rather than lux, if you talk about metrics.
That's the exodence, isn't it, metric that that his name escapes me, the guy in New Zealand came up with anyway.
So that's Ray Cuttle.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry,
yes.
Kit Cuttle.
Kit Cuttle.
It's interesting just to pick up on that. I've spent 2 years researching Kit's theories to determine if we use cubic illuminants and ambient lighting, whether there would actually be a significant energy reduction. And it's very difficult to get anybody to put on any money on the table, but the current thinking is that it would probably be about the same as current energy levels, so no significant gain.
Jonathan, have you any thoughts on how you assess a project in terms of its environmental credentials?
Yeah, we're having a big conversation at the moment because naturally it's very easy to look at the data-driven approach. I don't fear data. I quite like it. I think it's all right. It's great to have this, but we obviously have to understand that it's all about humans at the end of the day. It's all about people. There's the most environmentally friendly building has probably no windows. It's completely closed box and no one would want to be in it. So there's really no point building it. So it's interesting, even just because we got onto the subject, Lux, Kit Cuttle's approach and things like that. I think, I spoke about metrics in my talk of understanding embodied carbon. And the more you understand, the more you can try and reduce. We do also have to get a bit more mature about our conversations that we have about how people use space and make them spaces that can change and modify with the needs of people. You've got a talk coming up, Ray, about Cat A. We need to ditch that because it doesn't talk about people. Design for people, design for space, design for the task that's there. And yeah, we need to be more mature. We need a much more human-centric approach where people can feed back and that can change. Just to go on, John spoke about, wireless control, Kasambi and things like that. I think they're such great technologies because they are accessible so people can change their environments much more. And I think that's a great approach that we need to take. It's one of the beauties of technology. It can move things, and then that will give data, and then we can use that data to inform.
So when it comes to, sorry, Ray.
Go on, yeah, no, walk away.
We're talking about sort of qualitative metrics about the space, which is it's super important. But when it comes to sustainability, the two metrics that are important is how much energy we invest and how much material we invest. And that is obviously really, it's different types of materials, some are worse than others, but that is really it. How much do we like to invest in getting a flexible space or a well-lit space? And that's really it. That's what it boils down to, at least in my book, because that is almost a linear connection to how much we mess up biodiversity or how many lakes we pollute or how much carbon we emit. So I think that's it when it comes to metrics. That's the simplest one, at least for me.
I think, sorry, Joe, I think it's really interesting, your approach to kind of flexibility, isn't it? Because there's one approach you could take and say, I'm going to build in all the flexibility in my installation too, because I completely agree with you, John. You almost want to make sure that the spaces allow for the flexibility, and also the type of work in spaces might change over the future. But what I found so interesting from your approach, Joe, is that maybe the flexibility is not all in the equipment, but maybe you can just shift equipment around from projects. One day a place is a school, you get the school lights in, but then it changes to a kitchen or something else, and you kind of essentially swap these things around, which is an approach that I think I've never really thought about that, but that might be almost, I'm wondering if that's almost, a kind of more successful, because we found in projects where we build in all the flexibility that you always over specify stuff. Too much control, too much luminaires, too expensive, too many accessories. People lose accessories along the way. And then, things that just maybe swap around for purpose is a good idea. I thought it was inspiring.
If I could just, jump in there. The one thing I do worry, and I think these sorts of conversations are great, it's that the problem is that most projects that happen don't have the thought and sensibility that we put into things. So the approach that we're talking about, the approaches that we're talking about, the approaches you talk about, Joel, Sophie, you know, John as well, you know, most projects just go in. And I think that's the thing that we need to change. These levels of conversation need to keep happening, and people need to be more conscious as we go through. So I love Joel's approach, but it probably won't work on every project, and we need to sort of think about how we as an industry can hit that a little bit more.
Nigel, to bring you in here, you must be encouraged by the sort of the thought about reuse and seeing these projects where luminaires are being, you know, reconditioned, etc.
Absolutely, really inspiring to see those, and particularly, you know, the presentations from Sophie and John and Jonathan, where clearly and Joel as well, where the customer had asked you to come up with a reuse solution, and a reuse solution had really worked. I guess it would be great if we move just from the few customers who ask for this at the moment, and we actually are able to encourage more to think along these lines. And I wonder what you think about that. How, you know, to what extent we can actually be starting to push it rather than just relying on the client choosing to go down this route.
I tell you what, guys, it's always interesting. Commercial space is always it's a different sphere, yeah. So it's always normally a lot about money, but I'm looking at a lot of schemes in the last 5 years where linear lighting, you know, so you've got long runs of linear light, which is all nice and lovely, all suspended, exposed surfaces and stuff, which is all very lovely. But actually that's kind of quite inflexible in terms of Cat B. You know, sort of people might want a partition that runs across the light fitting and stuff. And actually, if you think about it, what we used to do with modular ceilings, 600 by 600 grid, you know, it's exactly what Joe was talking about. I know it's mad, but you know, you take some lights from over here, you put them over there. It's a piece of cake, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And you know, I know it sounds mad, but and then you know, you've got switching PIR that just switches lights on and off and presence on off, and that's it. And that's unfortunately, for better or for worse, that is kind of the best way of being sustainable, I guess, is having a modular ceiling. And you know, you can just change the lights around to all 230 volt switching, job done. It's quite simple. You know, there's no electronics involved too much. It's very easy, but we're not in that space. So it's, you know, just is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk money, John? Can you tell us, you know, how that project you did for the brewery, would that cost more or less, or what was the price premium that they would have paid for new products as opposed to your reconditioning?
So that actually worked out less. I haven't actually got a definitive answer from the contractor as to how much less, but I believe it was that job was about, the refurbishment part was about 50 grand. I think new lighting was I think 60 to 70 grand. So, you know, it's probably about 60, 65, 62 grand. So we saved about 10 grand, 12 grand for the customer. But, you know, there's all that kind of other things involved. So you didn't have to get skips for all the waste. Do you know what I mean? There's all that kind of jazz and carry on. So I think, and they wouldn't have had to put up new suspension wires for the contractor. You know, there's all that kind of labor savings. So there's a lot of other things, not just looking at the lighting costs, but there's all the other labor and the waste costs added on to that. So you'd be saving quite a bit. Not for the client, of course, but for the contractor. Do you know what I mean? So they'd be saving quite a lot from that, because like I said, they just left the wires in situ, put the lights down, got the lights back, put them back up. It's very simple. Do you know what I mean? So.
Mm-hmm. And Sophie, your project, was there a sort of a saving for the client?
Yeah, so having done quite a few of these projects, the trend that I've noticed is that when you do the initial assessment, if it's going to cost more to refurbish a luminaire than buy a new one, all of the sustainability scruples tend to evaporate, and you know, it's all driven by money at the end of the day. So they're going to go for whatever fits the budget. But the trend I have found is that generally applies with, so we say, standard luminaires that were sold competitively in the first place, maybe a 4 by 18 watt fluorescent 600 by 600 standard fitting, very difficult to refurbish cost effectively. But there's a lot of projects out there, particularly offices, where the lighting originally created was custom luminaires to complement the architecture or be part of a chilled beam system. So the actual amount of money that originally went into the housings, for instance, and the aesthetics of the luminaires, which are still in very good condition, means that if it's possible to just upgrade the light source and preserve the lighting quality and the performance, it's a lot less cost to the customer than actually saying, well, you need to replace these luminaires with an LED equivalent and start again. So it's those types of projects which are really a win-win for both a lighting refurbishment company and also the customer as well.
Mm-hmm. Eamon Shah, who's a lighting designer at Light Bureau, is asking, are we at a point where the designer has to choose between aesthetics and functionality on the one hand and sustainability? Is there a balance? Ben's.
I think, sorry, I don't want to speak before Jonathan, but I think Jonathan said it absolutely right. Ultimately, I do think, and that's why I think regenerative design is so interesting. You know, you need to think about people, still think about people first. I don't say that from a selfish point of view, but there's absolutely no point. I mean, there's no point making a building if you can't use it as a person. Doesn't mean that you don't have to do all this other good stuff with it, but I think the challenge is to how to maintain these kind of great experiences, and it's just to put in while meeting all these other technical criteria. I think maybe the challenge just gets harder, but ultimately it still remains, in our optics, still about creating the best experiences for people and their well-being. The challenge just gets harder.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you think that, you know, like in that project, that office project you did, where your creativity was somewhat curtailed, wasn't it, when you had to reuse?
Do you know, because I was very conscious when I was putting that together that I would sort of feel like, was our creativity curtailed? It's still, I mean, the bits that I can't show you are lots of really nice, it's on an NDA, it's still in construction. There's like really nice breakout, whatever spaces. You know, working spaces you tend to have to compromise at some point, you know, especially if you've got a Cat A office or a Cat A type ceiling, 600 by 600. So I wouldn't say our creativity was somewhat curtailed. I think there was an expectation on that front, and that office will be fantastic. You know, the working spaces are going to be one part of that office as they move forward. So I don't think we're at that point where we have to sort of say, oh, we have to compromise aesthetics for the sake of sustainability, because we, as I said before, and as Ben spoke about, you know, we need spaces to be usable. We want them to be really good, human-centric spaces, but also carry those criteria that we need for the planet.
Jonathan, can I ask, are you seeing more customers starting to ask for this type of approach? Is it increasing significantly, or is it still just a handful of really forward-thinking organisations?
No, I mean, there's always going to be a cost element to it, which is obviously can drive some things. But you know, everyone went through COVID-19, reevaluated lots of things that happen in their lives. Everyone has kids. Everyone has young people in their lives. Young people look for meaning. They want to be attached to something that doesn't feel like a big bad machine that's doing the wrong thing. So, you know, even developers are saying, look, hang on, what can we do that's better? So we get challenged all the time. You said earlier, you know, that it's clients that challenge. Yeah, we challenge back. You know, we keep going. Sometimes you don't get your own way. Sometimes you have to have compromises. Sometimes the finances do count. But yeah, it's definitely growing across the board from, you know, even contractors are saying, oh, what we need to, a contracting company has its own ESG credentials they have to hit. So they need to do the best. I say even contractors, that sounded rather condescending. I didn't mean that, but they're not perhaps the first that you would think of, but they're driving it as well. So it's coming from all angles, and that's what's brilliant about it.
And Joel, you were telling me previously that, you know, some clients will actually pay a premium for reconditioned luminaires.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for this approach, yeah, I mean, they're willing to. I mean, those are basically all of our clients. They are, you know, we need to take this responsibility. We as a municipality need to take this step, and it's a little bit about just learning how to think about resources in a different way. I mean, lights are a fairly small part of their like whole budget for a big company, but this is an easy way to start thinking about using resources differently. So then it makes sense. There's another value there. It's not only light. And that question that that you got from the Q&A, my take is that, I mean, it depends on the project. It's really about how much material, energy, and money would this client like to invest in order for it to be, you know, look better. Because a standardized approach, it's way easier to handle. It's way easier to take care of. It's way easier to move around, all of that. And so it all depends. They have to think about what's my material budget, what's my energy budget for this project. And that comes into play when we talk about reusing stuff as well. Like, how much aluminum do we lock up into the ceiling? Or could we use, like, my seal, is that the English word? Like sponges? Could we use that instead and unlock a lot of materials that are needed for, you know, solar or like whatever else? That's why I'm on this approach. Like, we need to think about the material and energy that we actually use. And obviously it's way better to use material that's already been dug up out of the ground and sort of already processed, but that's not always true, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and on that note, I think we're going to wrap up because we come to the end of our time. Thank you guys for sharing your insights and your experience and your knowledge today. Just a reminder that on the 17th of November, we're drilling into, as I said, a topic that we don't normally talk about. It was Cat A fit outs and sometimes the waste that happens from them, new luminaires ending up in skips. And we're going to look at solutions, possible solutions to that problem. So I recommend that 11 o'clock. Thursday, 17th of November. We'll see you then. Thank you, Joel, Sophie, John, Jonathan, Benz, and Nigel for today and for sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
See you guys. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.